Oh boy, I'm going to have to make this into a two-part video right here because, well, the stories are pretty interesting. Well, that sounds like a cliche right there. Actually, one of them in particular is quite extraordinary. The song and the fan, and the thing is, I'm not really a big fan of both of these records that I'm about to talk about. But the song is at number 20. Talk about the song really at number 20 on this fancy playlist, August 29th, 1987. Dan Hill, Can We Try Just a Little Bit Longer, along with Vonda Shepard. Now, I got to give a shout out later on to Vonda Shepard. She came out with an amazing record back in 1998. It was off the Ally McBeal TV show. She did a soundtrack for it. She did mostly covers, I think, but she had that one original song I'll try to bring up later on. But let's talk about Dan Hill. And not really into slow records. These mainstream slow records never got into them. But if they're hit records, I mean, a hit record is a hit record. Can't We Try? This would be his biggest hit in about almost 10 years. He did the song Sometimes When We Touch back in the winter of 77 and 78. And I want to talk about that song real quick, just real quick, part one of this video, because the story is just, I think a lot of people can relate to this. It was certainly a huge record back, late 77, early 78, into the early spring of 1978. Top 10, went to number 3 on Billboard's Hot 100. I never really got into the song, but I tell you, it had some original lyrics in the record, particularly when he went into, when I ask if you love me, or if you ask me if I love you, or something like that. And then that line, I choke on my reply. How many times do you hear that in a pop record? And it's almost like he took his songwriting lessons from somebody like Paul Simon or maybe Bob Dylan or somebody. But it was a brilliant record. Sometimes, now the backstory on that, this really is for my 70s channel, but I just can't resist talking about this, at least for just a few minutes. Dan Hill was from Toronto. He came from a well-to-do family, but it was a very conservative, straight-laced family. And when he got out into the world, he met a woman who was, she was older than he was. She was quite worldly too. She got around. She was a high roller of the first degree. And kind of the equivalent of, say, a sophomore in high school going out with a senior or junior in college. I mean, there was that kind of a divide there. But she was interested in him. She was willing to go out with him. But she had these other boyfriends. And like I said, boy, she had some high-rolling boyfriends too. Her other boyfriends, football players. There were football players on the Toronto, there was football players who played with the Toronto team. And there was... she was going out with some famous photographers, athletes, and it stressed him out, because what happened is when they were going out, she would tell Dan, she'd say, man, my other boyfriends are so rich, they got so much money, they're so much mature, they got it together, they got a career going. And can you imagine how that made him feel? And, he figured but he really wanted this relationship to be more monogamous. And there's a lot of social issues that go into this too, because this is in the early 70s when the social climate, that the changes that began in the 60s were reverberating through the 70s, particularly female stereotypes and all that being shattered. But I don't want to go into all that right now. But basically, he figured the only way that he could really make her reconsider, focus solely on him, on their relationship. He knew that he wasn't rich. He knew that, he didn't have a great career or anything like that at that time. Of course, all that would change later on. But he was a songwriter. He knew how to write a song. He knew how to sing. So he wrote the ultimate love song for this girlfriend, for this woman. She was older. He was about 19. She was 22. The ultimate love song. And if he played it for her, if he sang it to her, that would be it. She would see the error of her ways. She would drop her boyfriends. And she'd focus solely on Dan. He was proud of it, and probably rightly proud of what he did. Even got a little cocky about it. So one day he worked up the courage to call her. On the phone, he sang the song. The early incarnation of Sometimes When We Touch. He played it for her over the phone. And he expected her to, oh my goodness, Dan, I am so sorry. I'm dropping all my other boyfriends. You're the man. You're the kingpin, but you're the kingpin or whatever. I mean, he expected her to just swoon. There was silence on the other end. After the song was finished, playing over the phone, silence, complete silence. She might have been speechless. And then she said something like, Dan, you're really intense for a 19-year-old. That's just really too intense. I'm leaving town. I'm going out with a football player. That's it. My goodness. Well, anyway, Sometimes When We Touch, he's teamed up. Gosh, I can't remember the name of the songwriter that he teamed up with. I'll come up with it. I'll remember it when I do part 2 of the next video. But then, ironically enough, it turned into one of his biggest hits, Sometimes When We Touch. So now let's get to the second part, Can't We Try? I remember now, Barry Mann, the guy who Dan Hill worked with later on Sometimes When We Touch, he arranged the record or helped arrange the record. Barry Mann, a very prestigious figure that Dan Hill worked with on that record, Sometimes When We Touch. Barry Mann, who co-wrote with Cynthia Weil, I believe that's how you pronounce her last name. They wrote You Lost That Loving Feeling by the Righteous Brothers. We got to get out of this place, which is covered by the Animals, and Hungry by Paul Revere and the Raiders. And then he helped him help create this song, Sometimes When We Touch by Dan Hill. That was one heck of a collaboration right there. But now let's get to another collaboration now. The song at number 20 on my fancy playlist, up 5 from 25. Vonda Shepard, I believe I pronounced her first name right. Can't We Try? Dan Hill, Vonda Shepard, fancy playlist, August 29th, 1987. One of those slow, lovey-dovey classics. Summer classic indeed. Vonda Shepard, she lived in a home 5 blocks from where Dan Hill was recording studio. She lived 5 blocks from a recording studio. She worked there sometimes. And she did some backup singing. She met Dan Hill maybe about once or twice before she collaborated with him on this song. Vonda Shepard, she knew the studio manager of that recording studio. And the studio manager, here's the deal. Dan Hill was auditioning singers. And he wasn't happy with any of them. And the studio manager, he came up to him and she said, look, there's this woman named Vonda Shepard. She is fantastic. She is good singer. She'll be a perfect fit. She sings at a little nightclub here. I think you should give her a try. And Dan Hill goes, okay, let's give it a whirl. She gives Vonda Shepard a call. Vonda Shepard, this is July 3rd, 1986. Vonda Shepard, she goes to the recording studio, and she auditions for Dan Hill, and Dan Hill was like, yes, you're in. Let's do this thing. Come back tomorrow. Can you come back tomorrow? Sure, I can. July 4th, 1986, Vonda Shepard, she goes back to the recording studio, and they lay down the tracks. They laid down the song, Can't We Try, which became a massive hit, a top 10 hit. I'm not sure if it went to number 1, but I know it was up there in the top 5. And she was on the road. Now, later on, she was on the road. She was touring. She was on the road with Al Jarreau. And the bus driver had the radio on. And Vonda Shepard, she heard her voice on the radio along with Dan Hill doing that song. And she was like, oh, man, I can't believe it. And she had to get off the tour bus. She had to get off the tour, period. because she had to make a video for the song, and she made the video for the song, and she got a contract with Warner Brothers, and later became, I guess you'd call the singing voice. She did some soundtrack albums for Ally McBeal, which was a big TV show back in the 90s. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I think in the first part of the video, most of the songs she did on one of the soundtrack albums was covers, but then she had this fiery, almost sort of a soul combination of soul, funk, pop record. Got a soulful voice, pouring it out, searching my soul. Woo, boy, I love that record too. Back in 1998. I do believe the spring or summer 1998. I remember watching the video on MTV and probably on VH1. Maybe it was on VH1. The song did not chart here in the United States. Did not hit the Hot 100. Should have been top 10, top 20 on Billboard's Hot 100. But at least it went to number 10 in England. And Searching My Soul went to number 22 on the adult contemporary charts. But I think this song should have gone top 20. It had it. The song had it going on, but can't we try? It obviously had it going on too because, well, it's at number 20 on my fantasy playlist, August 29th, 1987.